Welcome to this explainer on warfare and British society. Today, we're skipping the fluff and diving straight into the crucial shift from feudal duty to professional armies during the early modern period.
Okay, here is the game plan for today. We're going to cover the changing nature of warfare, the civilian experience, and finally, we'll analyze the decisive Battle of Naseby. Section 1. The nature of warfare. By the 1500s and 1600s, the battlefield was utterly unrecognizable from medieval times. War was now driven by new, highly coordinated troop types. Let's break these down. First, you've got your Musketeers, armed with early firearms. But because they took forever to reload, they needed protection. Enter the Pikemen, whose job was literally just to protect those vulnerable Musketeers with massive long spears. Then we have Dragoons. Think of them as mounted infantry. They rode horses to move fast, but actually fought on foot. And finally, Cavalry. Sure, they provided essential mounted support, but they were no longer the unstoppable, solo, glory-seeking knights of the past. The key takeaway here, warfare had become a deeply coordinated combined arms system. Now, here is a massive structural change that is absolutely crucial for your exams: the emergence of the standing army. Unlike medieval forces that just gathered for a single summer campaign, a standing army is a trained, paid, and permanent professional fighting force. The emergence of a standing army meant war was no longer just a temporary seasonal duty. It was turning into a permanent state-run profession. And trust me, that completely changes how an entire society approaches conflict. Alongside this new army structure, weaponry was evolving rapidly. We see the widespread use of early muskets and pistols. Now, by today's standards, this tech was incredibly slow and unreliable. But historically, it represented a definitive transition away from the longbow, which had basically dominated the battlefield for centuries. This makes the early modern period the vital hinge between medieval, feudal combat and the modern, firepower-driven warfare of later centuries. When we talk about historical change, this technological shift is one of the absolute biggest leaps. Section 2. The experience of war. So how did this massive military restructuring actually change the everyday experience? Well, we see a huge historical shift in recruitment. Under the old system of feudal levies, forces were regional, temporary, and tied completely to local nobles. But in stark contrast, look at the new model army, formed by Parliament in 1645. This was a national force. They had uniform training, regular pay, and their loyalty wasn't tied to any single local lord. The new model army is your strongest example of historical change regarding military recruitment. It's the direct ancestor of the professional national armies we recognize today. But what about the civilians caught in the crossfire? For them, the terrifying continuity was something called requisitioning. Make sure you know this term. This was the practice of roaming armies demanding supplies, horses, and shelter from local populations, very often by force. Because this was a civil war, armies were constantly crisscrossing the English countryside, chasing each other down. This meant that these armies violently disrupted daily life without any warning, stripping local communities of their vital resources, regardless of whether those civilians even supported their side or not. Section 3. Case Study, the Battle of Naseby. Let's apply all these structural concepts directly to a historical event. We're looking at the ultimate clash of systems at the Battle of Naseby in 1645. This wasn't just men fighting men. It was Parliament's highly disciplined, professionally structured new model army facing off against King Charles I Royalist forces, which were organized in a much more traditional, older manner. Let's break down the opposing forces. On one side, we have the parliamentarian forces, the new model army, commanded by Sir Thomas Fairfax, with Oliver Cromwell leading the cavalry. Their absolute defining key word here is disciplined. Fairfax's infantry and Cromwell's cavalry worked as a highly coordinated machine. On the flip side, you have the Royalist forces, commanded directly by King Charles I. While undeniably brave, they were a traditional force, featuring notoriously undisciplined cavalry. So Fairfax and Cromwell held a distinct advantage, not just in overall numbers, but crucially, in that structural discipline we discussed earlier. So how did this structural advantage actually play out during the fight? Well, first, Oliver Cromwell's famous cavalry, known as the Ironsides, successfully engaged and break the Royalist horse troops on their side of the battlefield. But here's the critical moment. Instead of wildly pursuing the fleeing enemy, which, by the way, is exactly what the Royalist cavalry did on the opposite flank, Cromwell's troopers show incredible discipline. They immediately regroup under intense pressure. Then they pivot and strategically attack the Royalist infantry from behind. Cromwell's success wasn't just about personal bravery. It was the intense, drilled discipline of his cavalry to execute a complex maneuver within a coordinated, combined arms system. The result of this disciplined maneuver was devastating for the king. The Royalist infantry was absolutely destroyed, and thousands of soldiers were captured. Because of this massive loss of experienced troops, King Charles I's ability to win the war outright was completely finished. Sure, he managed to hold out for about another year, but the Battle of Naseby made ultimate defeat almost certain. It proved, once and for all, that professional, coordinated organization could systematically crush traditional forces.
To really lock this in for your exams, let's consider a specific question you might face. How significant was the role of Oliver Cromwell in the parliamentarian victory at Naseby? When you get a question focusing on a single historical figure like this, you have to carefully balance their individual impact against the wider systemic changes we've just learned about.
So, for a balanced assessment, yes, Oliver Cromwell's cavalry discipline was undeniably significant. We literally just saw how they regrouped and attacked the infantry. But you have to look at the wider context. Royalist strategic mistakes, like their cavalry wildly pursuing the enemy instead of regrouping, played a huge role. Furthermore, the overarching structure of the new model army was decisive, and Parliament simply had a major advantage in numbers. The golden rule here: never let one individual carry your entire historical argument. It's all about the systems. As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this thought to ponder. If discipline, structure, and combined arms tactics so thoroughly defeated traditional power at Naseby, at what point does an army stop being just a group of warriors and start becoming a calculated machine? Think about that as you continue your studies.